What's up? What's happening on a Friday here on the Team 980? I am Craig Hoffman. Happy to be with you. And we got a great one today. Ready to get it going. Got great guests coming up. We got Howard Beck. We got Ava Wallace on the Wizards stuff and some of the NBA stuff. But we start with the top story of the day that 5 NFL players have been suspended for gambling. Yikes. This is a pretty fascinating story. Of course, it hits home because Shaka Toney, the defensive end for the Commanders, who played in all 16 games on special teams last year, got some rotation at defensive end as well. He's a part of it. From a football perspective, like, Shaka Toney is very replaceable, with all due respect to Shaka Toney. He's an interesting prospect. You would have really hoped he would have popped by now, going into the final year of his rookie deal. Chances are, if they don't go edge early, they'll probably go edge late, and that guy would have been competing with Shaka Toney for a roster spot anyway and had a great chance of beating him out. So from a football perspective, not a huge deal. What this is a huge deal, though, is how sports and gambling intersect. And obviously, they have always intersected. Basically, since games have been played, you have been able to gamble on them, and that's why a lot of people are interested in sports. I think it is much more upfront now that not only is it legal in most states, but it's become a huge part of the advertising model. Like, more people are doing it than ever because they can do it above board. There was a lot of folks who maybe were interested and would throw down a wager when they went to Vegas, but now you can gamble from not anywhere, but many places within many jurisdictions, now including Virginia and Maryland. And specific to Shaka Toney, presumably, in Virginia. And this is where I think the NFL has a potential updating of their rules to do. Because it's very simple. You cannot, as an NFL player, bet on NFL games. That's never going to change, nor should it. The reasoning is pretty simple. Even if you're not betting on your own team, and even if you were to bet on your team to win, that's a chance to manipulate the game because, a point spread is different than, money line wagers. You're a participant. You can't be betting on things that you're participating in unless it's like a pickup game where, hey, I'm betting you lunch that I can beat you one-on-one. That's the whole point of it. But you're getting paid. The point is to win, and thus that's your payout. And ironically, Shaka Toney here, for getting caught and suspended, is going to lose out on $940,000 of his salary this year, which in my book is a pretty bad beat. But it's also important that these guys don't, bet on other games because they have potentially inside information, right? Like, let's say you play the Cowboys and then the next week you, based off what you saw on tape and experience, you bet on the Cowboys. That's not really a fair bet. And also, like, those are your competitors. You're a part of the ecosystem in which that bet exists. And that becomes a slippery slope, too. And I'll admit that, betting on college football, if you're a rookie and you come out of Alabama and all your friends are still on the team, you have inside information. You can call your buddy who was your roommate last year who's still on the team because you left a year early, and he tells you, hey, man, we don't got it this week. Our practices stink. And all of a sudden you bet on the team to cover against Bama. And, Nick Saban's up there in the press conference afterwards yapping about how his team wasn't focused and you're cashing your check. Is that fair? No, that's not it. That's inside information. Like, you can't do that, technically. You're probably going to get caught for it. No. But if you make too big of a bet, I'm sure people would have your attention. But that stuff is black and white. That stuff is straightforward. You can't bet on something that you're a part of, and that includes the ecosystem and NFL players betting on NFL games. What Jamison Williams got suspended for, the Lions wide receiver out of Alabama, is betting on college football, but he did it, apparently, in a team facility. And there are very strict rules for the NFL on placing bets while in a team facility. And that, by the way, is not just the practice facility. That's a team plane. That's a team bus. That's a team hotel. Anywhere you are officially representing the team, anywhere you're considered at work, you can't gamble. I have 2 problems with this is sitting in 2023. One, you can gamble from basically anywhere in states that it's legal, except for the District of Columbia, which decided for some reason to limit it because they wanted to do their whole app. And then you have to be, if you want to use the BetMGM app, you got to be near Nats Park, near the, you can still use your phone, but you got to be basically at Nats Park within the vicinity of the BetMGM, right? Same thing for the other books around their outposts in DC. But in Virginia, if I'm a DC resident and I want to use BetMGM and I drive to Virginia, all I got to do is cross the line, sit in my car, pull over, park, place my bet, drive back home to the district. I'm on my merry way. So as Shaka Toney presumably sits in the practice facility or is on a team trip to another state where it's legal, and he's on the bus ride to the hotel and he places a wager, technically that can get him suspended. And that's apparently some version of that is what Jamison Williams did. And that seems outdated. That just seems completely preposterous. I know you want to prevent guys from gambling on work time, but if your definition of that is that broad, and if they had just waited until they got home to do it, what's the difference really if they do it in the parking lot, if they do it between meetings, if they do whatever? It's their time. We don't limit almost anything else they can do. Obviously, you can't I'm on my lunch break, I'm going to go pop some roids real quick. But outside of that, we don't limit the activities. You don't limit Twitter time. You don't limit, any other way, any other app you can use your phone for. And so because of the accessibility of gambling now, I just think the NFL needs an update. And then the other one that to me is an even bigger sign of hypocrisy and where the NFL, I think, should give a little bit is you have sports books opening in stadiums now, including, by the way, at FedEx Field. And so let's say after a game next year, Shaka Toney suspended, so he won't be there. I won't isolate a player. Player X has a great game, finishes the game, and then wants to go hang out with his family in the sports book at FedEx Field after the game. And then they're doing that for a little bit, but it was a 1:00 game, and this is, October, late October, early November, and the Wizards play that night, and they want to then go to the Wizards game. But before they do, hey, I'm at the sports book, might as well slap down a wager at the stadium, at FedEx Field. That gets you suspended 6 games? What are we doing? It just seems ridiculous, because if they just waited and went into DC, went to Capital One Arena, stopped by the sports book that's at Capital One Arena right outside, or if they're doing this in Nats Park, they stop by BetMGM at Nats Park before Sunday Night Baseball, as if the Nats are going to be on Sunday Night Baseball in October. Not the point. Then they can place that bet, and they're fined by the NFL. That seems again, we're talking slippery slopes here, but one seems to be safely not near the slope, and the other, at the bottom of the slope you've already fallen down in terms of betting on NFL games. The slope ain't that slippery, and that's not that close to the edge. And so if the NFL is going to embrace gambling like it is, if they're going to embrace the league part and then these different sports books as league partners, then they're going to have to update their rules to reflect the current state of what sports gambling is. Sports gambling is something that can be done from a phone. It's something that exists within NFL stadiums. And as long as players aren't betting on NFL games, then they should let them bet like everybody else. If you want to make different rules and say you can't bet on sports, period, for whatever reason, that's a different discussion. But at the end of the day, they're adults, and they should be allowed to be adults like everybody else. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app, streaming live as well, youtube.com/@theteam980. And when we get back, we'll take your calls on this, 301-230-0980, 301-230-0980. Your thoughts on the NFL news of the day. Suspensions for 5 players, indefinite for Shaka Toney of the Commanders for gambling on games. I'm Craig Hoffman, taking your calls next here on The Hoffman Show. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. So, talking about at 301-230-0980, the NFL story of the day that 5 players have been suspended for gambling, 3 of them suspended for the 2023 season. An indefinite suspension technically can apply for reinstatement. 2 were Detroit Lions. They were released immediately after. The third, or after the announcement, the third is defensive end Shaka Toney of the Washington Commanders. 2 other players, including last year's first-round pick for the Lions, Jameson Williams, were suspended 6 games. The indefinite suspensions were for betting on NFL games in 2022. The 6-game suspensions for betting on college football while on the premise of an NFL facility of some kind. We don't know whether it was a team plane, a team hotel, a what, but we do know that they ultimately did bet on college football while at work, if you will, and thus they are suspended 6 games. I think the NFL has, like, the year-long suspensions don't really, or the indefinite ones don't really bother me. I think the 6-game ones are silly. I think that they need to revamp how this whole system works. Toby's back in today with me. Anthony back on Monday. Toby, we were texting about this a little bit before the show. Like, what do you make of this as you sit there in your sportsbook T-shirt?
Well, I mean, I think it's obvious that you can't have players betting on games. Like, that's obvious that they can't bet on their own stuff. So, like you said, indefinite suspension for betting on the NFL, no issue with that. But, yeah, I mean, if they want to throw a little money on college basketball or a baseball game as they're leaving the facility, who cares? Like, is that really that big of a deal that you're going to have them sit out 6 games for it? I mean, you know, Jameson Williams missed most of last season. Now you're going to miss 6 games because, who knows, maybe when he was rehabbing his injury, he decided that he wanted to get in on some action for some random game that's not the NFL. Like, I don't have an issue with that. Like, if I'm at work right now, obviously I'm in Half Street Studios in D.C., so like you said, I can't place a bet. But if I wanted to, if I were just at work somewhere else, I could place a bet. Why does it matter that NFL players are at their practice facility placing a bet on Major League Baseball?
Yeah, I mean, if you're sitting at home, or not at home, if you're sitting in a meeting room and your coach is not there yet and you're just BSing with the guys waiting on a meeting, who cares? Like, is that any worse than being on Twitter, than being on Instagram, than, you know, being online shopping on, like, who cares? Like, even make it spending money. Like, yeah, okay, you're online shopping. You're buying yourself a overly expensive T-shirt or shoes or a car or what, like, you know, groceries. I don't care. Could be functional, could be fashion, could be whatever you want. We don't legislate that because they're adults. And again, if you want to talk about the slippery slopes of gambling in general, right? If you don't want players getting in gambling debt trouble or messing with any of that, fine. I would say that's ridiculously Hippocratic. Not Hippocratic. That's the Hippocratic method. That's a way of thinking. There's a lot of hypocrisy there. I won't
Hypocritical.
Thank you. It's been a long week, Toby. A long week.
It's all good.
It'd be incredibly hypocritical because you as a league are now endorsing all of this stuff, and you've got every other ad being every other sports book. And, like, I'm fine with that. This being above board is ultimately good. Like, when I do my BetMGM live reads, I have to do the fine print at the end that talks about the gambling hotlines and stuff for a reason, asking you to please gamble responsibly or call, insert the number here, whether I'm doing the ad for Virginia or Maryland on that given day. Like, that's fine. But don't be hypocritical then and say we don't want our players doing this when they're, I mean, for all we know, Jameson Williams did this when he was on the road in his hotel the night before a game. Like, he was watching his alma mater, Alabama, and 10 minutes before kickoff, or even during the game, there's live betting. He's live betting a game at the team hotel. That violates the policy and gets you 6 games. What are we doing?
Well, I'll throw this scenario out for you, Craig, because think about just here at the office. Think about you with your buddies. You know, you're sitting there just talking at the copy machine, or you're over at a buddy's house. You're just watching some games and you're talking, right? And players hang out at the practice facility. Players hang out sometimes
Correct.
in the locker room with each other. So what if they're sitting there and they're just looking through some lines, just seeing what's going on, like you would at your house hanging out, or you would at work just talking in the cafeteria or whatever, and they're like, oh, the Wiz got 9.5 points tonight against whoever they're playing? Let me hit that real quick. You know, just like you would at your job, or you would hanging out with your buddies on the weekend at a bar or at someone's house. Sometimes the players just hang out at the facility. So if they're just hanging out and decide, you know what, I like the Wiz tonight, why can't they place a bet on that?
I don't know. Like, I truly, honestly could not tell you what the logic is in why that is the case. It makes absolutely zero sense to me for the exact reason that you said. They could do this anywhere else. Like, in a way, you know, the NFL is like, oh, we don't want guys going out. You know, they got curfew. They don't want this night before a game. Okay, so I'm going to sit in my hotel room and watch the game. And if I want to, you know, if I'm an NBA junkie, I covered, obviously, the team for a long time. There's a lot of dudes that loved hoops. If they want to sit on a Saturday night and watch NBA games and have a couple of games going, maybe they've got League Pass. You know, they bring their iPad, they fire it up, they bring their own Apple TV or their Xbox or whatever, they fire up League Pass, they got a couple of games going. They want to throw together a quick parlay on a Saturday night in October or in November, December, in the middle of the season. You know, you got to play the Christmas Day. You know, you got a game the next day and you're on the road. Like, who cares? And I guess that's kind of my point is, like, it's... If you want to talk about the fears of guys having, you know, like a bookie having leverage over them, and like all of a sudden that gets you in trouble in some of the ways in which gambling, when it was all underground, could be problematic, fine. I don't, like, if Jamison Williams is using MGM or FanDuel or DraftKings or whatever, like, they're not, the FanDuel monsters aren't going to come after you and be like, hey, you better not score tomorrow, or you better get that first touchdown. Like, whatever the leverage version, the mafia version of this stupid fantasy that people have is. And I'm sure they've updated some of these rules since all of this became above board, but it feels like some of this is just, one, limiting in a way that doesn't make any sense. There's no logical through line to you can gamble, but not here, especially when here is such an expansive definition of what is NFL quote-unquote property in this case, like team hotels, team buses, team planes, not just the practice facility or the stadium. But when we're no longer talking about gambling being something that's an illegal activity that's done, you know, in shady ways, like, it just feels so unnecessary and so illogical. And especially when the price is, you're hurting your own product. Like, what are you protecting? Nothing. What are you hurting? The Lions.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest with the sports books. They don't want my bets, the little $2 and $3 bets because I'm on a radio salary. They want the big bets, guys throwing some big money on things. And you cover the team, Craig. I mean, during the season, especially the guys that are grinding, the guys that work really hard, they're at the facility a long time. And so think about the times that you would decide, I'm going to put some money down on this game tonight. They're still at the facility more than likely because a lot of guys get there early, they're leaving late, and so they're at the facility during the prime time to place the bets, and so they might miss. They can only do, like, live lines and stuff like that, and maybe they'd want to put something on the regular line or whatever the case may be. So,
sure, and the thing is, I also don't think, Toby, people realize how much downtime they have.
Yeah.
Like, how much dudes spend so much time on their phones at the facility, whether it's waiting during the open locker room period because they're someone that we're not necessarily talking to. If they're in the cold tub, they're on their phone. If they're getting treatment, they're on their phone. Like, these guys are doing a lot of stuff where they also can be on their phones, and they put them away theoretically for the meetings, or they text through them and their coaches get mad. But what, you know, they are. It's not like there is no downtime, and we don't want you to do that because you should be focused at work. No, wrong. That's not realistic. That's not how any of this works.
Yeah, I mean, if you think that it shouldn't be, that should be allowed to gamble, then that's a totally different conversation. If you're frustrated by, like, the new NBA CBA where players can endorse different sports books and stuff and you can see an issue there, I can understand that conversation. But your point, I think just allowing guys to bet at the facility as long as it's not on NFL games, I don't know why you wouldn't allow that.
I don't either. If anyone wants to tweet us, I guess no phone calls on this so far. So if you want to tweet us and let us know if you have a reason why, enlighten us. 301-230-0980, because neither of us have a freaking clue. When we get back, I also don't have a clue as to what's going on in the NBA playoffs with the officiating. Why the hell is it so inconsistent? We'll talk through it next. The disaster in Brooklyn last night. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and always live on the free Odyssey app. You can. talk about the officiating because this is a problem that seems to come up every year for the league in some form or fashion, right? We always seem to get some kind of NBA officiating story. Someone gets ejected, there's a suspension. And people are typically just mad about it in the way that people get mad about officiating all the time. I don't like the call. It's not good. This hurt my team. It's a very partisan in a lot of ways. But what the difference to me is this year is the extreme lack of consistency. And I think the thing that's frustrated me the most, obviously talking about what happened last night in Brooklyn, if you're unfamiliar, Game 3 of the Nets and the Sixers. Opening minutes of the game, Nick Claxton dunks on Joel Embiid, tries to do the Ty Lue step over, and Embiid doesn't like it. And I understand why he doesn't like it. But in response, he kind of kicks up at, he kicks up at Claxton. And looks like he's aiming for his nether regions. He misses his nether regions. And as a result, gets a flagrant 1. And he's allowed to stay in the game. And it feels patently ridiculous. It feels, I mean, watching that and then watching what happened to Draymond the other night, I truly don't understand the consistency. But, okay, fine, Draymond's Draymond. He's got a reputation. People get caught up in the moment. They don't want to inject Embiid. Hey, maybe they even learn from their mistakes. We don't want to inject Embiid. It was a mistake to eject Draymond Green. Let's not do that this time around. Okay, fine. Well, later in the game, James Harden is being closely guarded by Royce O'Neal. O'Neal right up on him, kind of does the thing where, Harden's in triple threat position. He's got the ball down on his hip. He's got his body turned. O'Neal has an opportunity to push up into Harden's chest. So he does. And as Harden goes to drive by him with his right hand, he puts his left hand out to shield. And at least from the way I saw it, my vantage point on my couch, the same vantage point all of you had watching from your couches, Harden misses as he goes to kind of put his hand on O'Neal's hip or his thigh or whatever, and he does hit him in his nether regions. And O'Neal goes down, drops like a fly. Don't blame him. That hurts a lot. Ouch. Mommy. But it's an accident. And Harden can't believe he gets called for a foul. It's an offensive foul. No argument. But they call him for a flagrant 2 and throw him out of the game. And to me, the lack of inconsistency is just appalling. Because at the end of the day, that's what, you want good officiating. People say, oh, we want consistency. And as long as we get consistency, call it tighter, call it. And to a point, yes. That's a secondary desire as far as I'm concerned. My primary desire is be good, get it right. There is a rule book. Your job is to be there and enforce it. Hey, can you not stink? But if you're going to miss, at least miss consistently. And, I think the best example is umpiring in baseball. If you're going to call a wide strike zone, you better call a wide strike zone. So, if you call the same pitch a strike 3 times in a row and it's a ball 3 times in a row, I'm not happy about it. You should have done better at your job. But by strike 2, strike 3, that's my fault. You called it a strike. Okay, a strike's a strike. Whatever. In basketball, same thing. If you're going to call touch fouls, then call touch fouls. I know I got to keep my hands out. I hate that. I'd rather you just allow the amount that's supposed to be allowed by rule. But if you're going to call touch fouls, you call touch fouls. If you're going to let me hammer someone, I want to know that too so I can get my shots in. / play, more physical defense and know that I'm going to get away with it. Don't let them manhandle or let me manhandle someone for 3 quarters and then call me for 3 ticky-tack fouls in a row in the 4th, or vice versa. And so when decisions are as big as a player getting thrown out of the game or not in a pivotal 2-0 game in a series, the lack of consistency between Draymond, who, let's call it, I'm going to classify them this way. Harden, complete accident. Embiid, trying but missed. There was intent. And I'm going to classify Draymond as negligible, right? And well, I don't think he was trying to hurt Sabonis, but he was also not trying not to hurt Sabonis. He's like, whatever. I stomped down. Again, I still think that was a case of gravity. But if he definitely didn't make a and afterwards he also said, like, I wasn't really going to make an attempt to not step on him. He grabbed my leg. I stepped where I stepped.
It's a weird position to be at if you're looking at it from the NBA official standpoint, because, and I don't know why they made the decisions that they did, because if I had to judge the two last night, isn't a kick worse than call it a slap? Like, I don't know that I would entirely classify what Harden did as non-intentional. I think that he did it with the intention of, obviously, like you said, maybe getting on his hip, holding him up a little bit, but in turn, like, if he did miss and do what he did, like, he wasn't going to be disappointed by it. So, like, I wouldn't say it was completely accidental, but at the same point, how is that ejectable as opposed to a dude trying to kick him with the bottom of his foot? Like, tapping someone as, like, a love tap type of idea as opposed to kicking them should be worse. So I don't understand why they decided that Embiid was fine with a kick. Like, I think they were sort of right in the Draymond thing. I don't think that they should have suspended him. I think that's an incident you just leave happened in that game. I think with Embiid, it should have been a similar thing. Like, you should be ejected. You cannot kick up at a guy. Kicking is worse than accidentally slapping or hitting. If it were a punch, it'd be different. But kicking is worse than what Harden did. So to go from not ejecting Embiid to calling a flagrant 2 on a Harden, there's no consistency there, like you said. And, I mean, officiating seems to be an issue in a lot of sports right now. But when it comes to the NBA playoffs, it's always a storyline, and it's so frustrating because the play on the court is phenomenal. The playmaking, the shot making is at its all-time high, and yet we're always talking about officiating.
No, I agree, and I think it's multi-layered too. One thing I want to say before I forget is also these are all talked about with New York, like with Secaucus, right? The NBA Replay Center, and thus the NBA's head of officiating, is involved in all of this. Like they have those guys on the headset. So there shouldn't be, like you can't even say, hey, it's inconsistent because it's crew to crew. And Tony Brothers, the crew chief in Brooklyn last night, said it came down to the fact that Harden made contact in Royce O'Neal's nuts and Joel Embiid didn't in Nick Claxton's. And I think that's a pretty stupid way to adjudicate that. I care way more about the intent because, one, I'm trying to make sure that guys don't try stuff, and two, like Embiid, like I don't want someone trying the Embiid thing because if they do make contact, that's way more dangerous than what Harden did. And on Harden's front, I want guys to feel free to play basketball. And I'm sorry, but using your off arm to shield, while technically against the rules, is a part of NBA basketball. It's a part of every pickup game everywhere, all across the globe. If you extend and you really push off and people want to call it, fine, it's an offensive foul. And that's why I would have been fine with an offensive foul. Hey, man, you missed. If you want to ride someone's hip, which I think is what Harden is trying to do, you're trying to get the defender to where you're on their hip and you have that control over them and you can kind of ease into it and shield with that left arm. Okay, fine. Totally cool with it. But if you are going to play the game where you prevent basketball moves because occasionally, like I think the same thing is true when guys make a play on the ball trying to block a shot and accidentally hit a guy in the head. Like, yeah, that sucks, but it's unfortunate. He was trying to block the shot. And so even if you want to give flagrant 1 there, like, hey, let's be a little more careful next time, a warning shot, fine. I don't want guys getting hit in the you-know-whats.
And I think you're dead on there with, you can officiate intent, because I can disagree with you that Harden wasn't intentionally trying to hit O'Neal there. Like, we can have that discussion and we can both give and take. There's no discussion on what the intent was from Joel Embiid. We both know what he was trying to do, and yet the guy that got ejected was James Harden. So I think that's completely wrong in how they decide these things, and I think that you can officiate intent because a lot of the times it is pretty obvious what they're trying to do. And if it's a gray area where it's a guy like Harden where maybe you think that he didn't, I think that he maybe had a little intent, then you let that guy go. But the guy that had the obvious intent of hurting another guy, you cannot let him go.
Right. No, 100%. And if it's a gray area, like, and there's a big giant windup and a guy gets hit in the head and you're like, he might have been trying to block the shot, but, like, we don't really do the windup thing, fine, eject him. For something like Harden, ridiculous. And I will say this, the one they got right was Claxton. Anybody that disagrees with that wasn't paying attention. He already had one tech, and he flexed on him, and he kind of got in his face. And if you want to do that quick and run back down court, like oh crap, I already have a tech. Sorry, don't tee me up, run back down court, fine. You hold it there for 3-4 seconds, you are basically begging the refs to give you a tech. And I have no problem with them doing that. And it's an all-time dumb play by Nick Claxton, because it's a close game in the fourth quarter when you are trying to compete for your playoff lives down 0-2 in the series. So I have no problem with the Claxton taunting one. That was the obvious correct call. He begged them to call it. The other ones, I don't get it at all. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. And when we get back, a little weekend preview. What else is going on all around the sports world this weekend? We will get you set here on the Team 980. First, though, a look at what's trending.
Here's what's trending on the Team 980.
Again, the big story today, suspensions for multiple NFL players for gambling, including Commanders defensive end Shaka Toney. Suspended indefinitely, can ask for reinstatement after the 2023 season. He loses nearly $1 million in salary. The other big name that gets caught up is Jamison Williams, the first-round receiver who missed much of last year with an ACL injury for the Lions, but was wide receiver 1 on a lot of boards going into the draft outside of the injury. He's suspended just 6 games. Toney and the other 2 players who were suspended indefinitely bet on NFL games. Williams and another teammate bet on college games, but did so at an NFL facility, which is prohibited. Projected number 1 pick, Victor Wembanyama, officially enters the NBA draft. Wizards have the 7th best odds to get him at 6.7%. That's what's trending. I'm Craig Hoffman on the Team 980.
This is DC's home for Maryland Terrapins basketball. The Team 980, always live on the free Odyssey app.
Nats fans, the party is just getting started at Nats Park as the 2023 season is underway.
They sit down the line, extra bases into the corner.
Bring your Natitude and cheer on Joey, CJ, Josiah, and all your favorite Nats players this spring.
See you later.
While you enjoy a beautiful day at the ballpark with cold drinks, great food, and unbelievable giveaways. Visit nats.com/tickets and join the fun.
Hi guys, it's Mark with Monument Medical Clinic. Are you struggling with erectile dysfunction and sick of the pills? Well, we have a major medical advancement that has helped thousands of men. Our wave technology is backed by 60 clinical studies, including from Cambridge University. It's been shown to increase blood flow by repairing blood vessels. No pills and no side effects. If you're ready to put a stop to your ED, call us now, and not only will the assessment and blood flow ultrasound be free, but will also include something unique that produces powerful results in the bedroom. You're going to love that one, guys. Trust me. This unprecedented offer is worth $600, but it's free to those who call in the next 2 minutes. Call 202-908-5555. That's 202-908-5555. Guys, put a stop to your erectile dysfunction and get your life back. Call Monument Medical Clinic now to qualify. 202-908-5555. 202-908-5555.
Nature Valley Crunchy Bars are the snack for out there. You know, the place where you hear sounds like this. And this. Oh, and this. Nature Valley. Life happens out there.
Hurry and shop the final days of SpringFest at Lowe's. Right now, get an additional $300 off when you spend $1,996 or more on select major kitchen appliances. And keep your lawn looking fresh with savings on the Ego 15-inch string trimmer. It was $219, now it's $199. Shop SpringFest today, because Lowe's knows spring. Lowe's knows home improvement. Valid to 426. Selection varies by location. While supplies last, exclusions apply. See Lowe's.com for details.
It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app, streaming live as well at youtube.com/@theteam980. So weekend preview time. We try to do this every Friday at 4:45. Well, we used to do it at 3:45, but now our show starts at 4, so we do it at 3:45. Obviously, the biggest thing this weekend is the NBA playoffs, at least in my book. You got a bunch of really big Game 3s that are going to help decide a whole bunch of series. Obviously, that continues tonight. Boston, Atlanta. Can Atlanta get one? I would say probably not. That's a 7 o'clock tip. You got an ABC game on a Friday night. Love that. Cleveland, New York, which I think was relegated to NBA TV. Maybe there was like, hey, look, we're going to stick you on NBA TV for Game 2, but we're going to get you the network for Game 3. That's at Madison Square Garden tonight. That building is going to be incredible, Toby. Like, if I could pick one playoff game to go to this weekend, that's probably the one.
Yeah, I've always wanted to get up to Madison Square Garden. For a playoff game, too, will be absolutely spectacular, but I came from Milwaukee, so I'm biased. I'm going to be checking out the Bucks.
Yeah, that one is tomorrow, though they're in Miami. Denver, Minnesota tonight, too. It's kind of crazy that Minnesota's even in this situation. Like, they won that game against Oklahoma City, and then it's just like, okay, we did it. They're ready, so ready for 1-2-3 Cancun. That roster, like, I think Tim Connolly did a great job in Denver. I'm not going to lie, man. When his name is coming up with the Wizards, I need to know way more about the Gobert trade before if that was that ownership, because if that was Tim Connolly's idea, I don't really want him here.
Well, I'm not a fan of the Gobert trade. Obviously, that's the one that you clown him for, but I'm not sold on a guy like Karl Anthony Towns. I think he's a good NBA player, but I don't think he's a winning NBA player. Like, I don't see him being a star on a franchise that's doing much more than doing what they've done this season and getting into the playoffs and losing.
No, I tend to agree with that too. He's just so inconsistent. Because the thing is, like, he is an impactful defender, or when he wants to be, like, good shot blocker, can guard. He's 7 feet tall and just a 40% three-point shooter. That's an incredibly rare combination. But I just don't know what you pair with him that unlocks the best version of him where he's like the second best player on a championship team. He definitely is not the best player on a championship team. The good news for Minnesota is he's not going to have to be, because Anthony Edwards is that dude. I mean, he is so freaking good. He had them competitive the other night. But at the end of the day, like, they don't have enough. And the Connolly thing is super interesting. Like, I really do want to know a lot more about that trade and who signed off on 4 first-round picks for Gobert and who thought the basketball fit was a good idea. Because if that was Tim Connolly, like, I have real questions, and one of them is, can you please stay away from the Washington Wizards? Because I would prefer someone else. But then again, if he was the guy that drafted Edwards and saw that at the top of that draft when that wasn't a consensus number 1 overall pick, come on down. Philly, Brooklyn, Game 4 tomorrow, so that series could go ahead and end. We're also at that weird point in the playoffs, Toby, where you got some series get way ahead of the other ones. You got Game 4 of Philly, Brooklyn, and Phoenix, LA tomorrow in like the mid-afternoon, 1 o'clock, 3:30, and then you have Game 3s. So this series could be, the Philly-Brooklyn series could be over before Milwaukee, Miami, and Memphis, LA play Game 3.
Yeah, it's a weird point where you get to where that stuff happens, but I don't know. The first round of the NBA playoffs isn't really as intriguing to me because you get some of these matchups where it's like, this team wasn't a playoff team. Like, they made it in just because of the play-in tournament. Like Minnesota, like you said, like, woohoo, you made the playoffs. Who cares? Like, you're just going to get spanked in the playoffs. And, like, I think you saw what happened. Miami was hot. Milwaukee was a little bit rusty. I'm assuming that Giannis will play tomorrow. I'm not sure.
Yeah, the latest is that he is trying everything but is not guaranteed to play. Honestly, if I'm Milwaukee, I might mess around on this one.
Yeah, I still feel like he could have almost played for Game 2 if they needed him. You know, if that were a Game 7, I think he could have stepped out on the floor. But, I mean, honestly, with how they played in Game 2, it seemed like they'd come off of a long break and hadn't got used to playoff intensity yet. Now they're used to it. I think they're going to roll through that series. So, I mean, it's going to be intriguing to see. But once we get to the big matchups like Boston and Philly, like, that's the stuff that's going to be really intriguing.
Yeah, no doubt. The other thing with that series is like Hero going out is the most significant injury of the series. Like even if Giannis was
Yes.
out the entire series, I would still like Milwaukee in that series
Well-
with what they have elsewhere, where Miami without Hero, like they were barely a playoff team with him.
Well, everyone was clowning Reggie Miller because he said something to that case, but it made it sound like Giannis being out was less of importance than Hero being out. But that's kind of what he was saying. Like, Milwaukee without Giannis is still better than probably Miami with Hero almost. And then Miami without Hero just takes a huge step down.
Right. Memphis, LA also tomorrow. Or sorry, you got both LA. Actually, you got a doubleheader at Staples tomorrow. All right, Crypto.com Arena. Sorry. Phoenix and the Clippers at 3:30 Eastern, and then the late game, Memphis at the Lakers, 10 p.m. Eastern. Hilariously, whatever ticket site ESPN uses, because that's what I've got up. I've just got the ESPN.com schedule up. Tickets as low as $30 for the Clippers game. Tickets as low as $200 for the Laker game. Same building, 7 hours apart. On Sunday, Cleveland, New York, Game 4. That's an ABC 1 o'clock tip. Sacramento, Golden State follows at 3:30, and then Boston, Atlanta, Denver, Minnesota. I can't wait for Sacramento, Golden State. That's the best crowd matchup in the first round as well. Like Cleveland, New York's pretty good. I guess they're 1A, 1B, but Sacramento was nuts. But I don't know if you watched that game or watched the highlights of that game last night. That Chase Center crowd in Golden State, everyone was like, is it still going to be electric after they leave Oracle? And it's not Oracle, but damn, that crowd was on fire. And in the opening moments of the game, you heard it through the TV kind of crowd.
Yeah, I mean, I think that home courts actually play an advantage in that matchup. I think, seeing Golden State drop the first 2 on the road, they've been a terrible road team all year. But now coming back, they didn't have Draymond in Game 3, and they found a way to win. I'm assuming they might even find a way to win Game 4, so you're tied going back to Sacramento.
I still think Dubs in 6 is a very good possibility.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like, I would like to see Sacramento move on, but, I mean, Golden State, they're the defending champs for a reason.
No doubt about it. All right. Other things this weekend, Premier League action. I always try to get you the schedule. If you want to wake up with the Premier League tomorrow, Fulham and Leeds. Leeds is in a free fall. Crystal Palace, Everton is tomorrow. Liverpool, Nottingham Forest, Brentford, Aston Villa, Leicester, and Wolves. And then you got the Sunday games at 9 a.m. Eastern. Newcastle, Tottenham, and Bournemouth, West Ham. Actually, right now there's a game going, and Southampton just tied it up. Wow, that's massive for the title race. Arsenal and Southampton tied at 3 right now. Arsenal at the top of the table, holding on for dear life. Spirit in town. I got to check and see what DCU's doing this weekend. I think they have a game. Spirit are tomorrow night, Saturday night at Audi Field, 7 o'clock against Houston Dash. Also watch DC United whenever they play this weekend. Go soccer. All right, when we get back here on the Team 980, Ava Wallace is going to join us from the Washington Post. Top story of the day outside of the gambling stuff is still the aftermath. Tommy Shepard was fired this week. That's nuts. I can't believe I'm saying that. Ava Wallace has more on where the Wizards go from here next on the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and always live as well on the free Odyssey app. on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. 5 o'clock always means we hit Now My Beat. Get that in just a second. Do want to let you know David Amendolara is going to join us coming up at 5:30. Howard Beck at 6. So got a lot of great guests coming in the final 2 hours of the show, but continuing to talk about the aftermath of Tommy Shepard, let's bring in our expert now.
Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not my beat.
And joining us now, continuing our coverage of the biggest story in D.C. this week, the Wizards moving on from Tommy Shepard. It's Ava Wallace from the Washington Post, their Wizards beat reporter. And Ava, I mean, I was certainly stunned on Wednesday night. All of a sudden I was like, oh, I guess I'm doing another hour of radio for you covering this team. I guess people had kind of heard maybe something could happen, but 10 days after the season, how surprised were you at how this all went down and that it even went down in the first place?
Yeah, I was definitely caught off guard. It's funny because you kind of start hearing those whispers, and they were more around the league of like, it was framed as, oh, if they don't bring back KP and if they don't bring back Kuzma, then, is Tommy's job in trouble? Is his job on the line this season? But it was definitely more like, if they don't get these guys, or later in the summer, would that be a thing? Or, definitely not, like you said, 10 days after the season. And it was definitely out of character for Ted Leonsis, I would say, who is shown to be a patient man. And he's got a lot going on this week. I mean, he has no hockey coach all of a sudden, and they're changing a lot in the coaching ranks. So a lot going on at Monumental Sports.
Yeah, and it is interesting, like, not to play like armchair psychologist with Ted Leonsis, but like, why? Do you have any early leanings, inclinations? And I mean, certainly the fever pitch of the fan base, I feel like, is at a different level than it's been basically since they fired Ernie. But still, like, Ernie got 9 years. So why do you think now is the time that they pull the plug on Tommy just 3 years or 4 years into his tenure?
I thought what was a pretty curt statement was kind of a good look into Ted Leonsis' mindset on this. He basically just said, we haven't made the playoffs in the last 2 seasons. That is pretty much intolerable for him. And that's kind of what I've heard behind the scenes too, is that he just got really sick and tired of hearing kind of the same things. And with Tommy Shepard, now he was not working with the best circumstances. Remember, he'd led this team through a pandemic. He got rid of John Wall's heavy contract. He turned it into a Russell Westbrook contract that everybody also thought was untradeable. So he made a lot of moves, but that's kind of the problem. Like, the flip side of that is if you make a lot of moves, if you bring in as much talent as Tommy Shepard brought in, there's only so many times you can say, oh, we're really injured. Oh, we're trying to find the right group before your top guy says, maybe we didn't need a different talent evaluator.
Yeah, I mean, that's the funky thing about this. I mean, I remember when Tommy took over, and I remembered warning everybody because everyone was so excited that Ernie was gone because things had been so topsy-turvy. I mean, now you look back, it's like, wow, that was a pretty successful run compared to the last 4 years. But generally speaking, things had not been great for the majority of his 9 years. He made all these trades where he's just trading away first-round picks, and I was like, look, the hole they're in right now is going to take years to get out of. And the thing that struck me about Tommy this season, and obviously like my interview with him blew up a little bit. He made similar statements to you guys in press conferences with patience. And it's like, okay, well, you got out of the hole, but it seems like you got out of the hole into a dead end. But I also thought that was kind of the plan that Ted wanted. Like, obviously Ted was on board with the Brad extension, if not driving it. He's not wanted to, be really bad in the past. He's always kind of had that make the playoffs goal. So where do you think the diversion is of, hey, we know this is going to take time and patience, and that was the company line, to after 4 years and getting us out of the hole, you're not the right guy to lead us anymore?
I think the diversion is that Ted Leonsis is Tommy Shepard's boss, and he gets to say when, and that's kind of the end of that. I mean, seriously, like, I'm totally with you. The thing about when we all write kind of these stories evaluating the job Tommy Shepard did is it's something it's a little bit harder to get at, and maybe I'm glad we had columnists kind of writing about it for us at least, is that it's, like you said, it's not like Tommy Shepard was acting alone. I mean, they were together on these plans, and it was Tommy executing Ted's plans, certainly, but he certainly had his own vision as well. So that's the diversion, is just he is the guy who gets to say when is when. And I also think, I was just talking about this with someone, but you're watching a lot of former Wizards have really nice playoff runs right now. Like Rui Hachimura is doing very well with the Lakers. Russ is playing well. Spencer Dinwiddie is in the playoffs. Like you got a lot of guys who Ted Leonsis pays attention to that stuff, and that's kind of hard to stomach.
Yeah, Ava Wallace from the Washington Post is with us here on the Team 980. And one thing that a caller brought up yesterday that I thought was interesting is the idea of player development and the lack of it in this organization. And that's something that I think is really, really interesting because it goes across coaching staffs. And I think when Scott Brooks got here, we all thought that was a strength of his. Turns out the Magic may have been a lot more of what Oklahoma City does organizationally than anything Scott Brooks particularly did. Obviously, that through line has continued now into the Wes Unseld era, and Tommy's been a part of this front office for so long. What do you kind of understand about how the player development game works within this organization? Obviously, the G League team has been very successful in terms of winning, but and they've also produced some NBA players. But like, how is that a through line that's gone across coaching staffs, and how could a new lead executive ultimately help that department?
I am so glad you brought that up. So you remember when Tommy Shepard was named general manager? It was kind of the moment when Ted Leonsis came out and said, I talked to these I think it was like 73 people or whatever, and we designed the new way to structure a basketball team. And if you remember, player development had a lot of power, was very empowered, as was the medical staff. So there were kind of these individual prongs that Ted Leonsis had set up and said, you're going to work within these parameters. He brought in Sashi Brown. You're basically telling a basketball executive that they don't have total control. So I think this is the reason, honestly, I've been kind of excited about this as someone who grew up in the area and has been paying attention to the Wizards for a while. Like, this is a huge opportunity for the Washington Wizards and for Ted Leonsis to gut everything if he wanted to. I think you should bring in a strong basketball mind, obviously. They have the business side in place, so I can't imagine that they're going to be bringing in someone like a Bob Myers who would want to have his hands in those pots and everything like that. But you can go a different direction in player development. You can kind of start over from scratch with this. And I think when you make it a through line, like if you want a fresh start, make it a fresh start everywhere, honestly. And that's a really good opportunity to do so here. And I totally agree with you. You look at Tommy Shepard's draft picks, and I think that's one thing that's really worth paying attention to when you kind of look back at the past 4 years is there were some hits, definitely, and a lot of players with potential, but none of them hit the way the Wizards needed their draft picks to hit. And that's not just drafting, it's also player development. So those two things definitely work in concert, and I think it's a huge opportunity to take a look at everything.
I think that's probably the single most damning statistic, like outside of win percentage, or the 50 win or lack of 50 win streak. The fact that they haven't had a player hit their second contract with them since Beal is, and obviously Tommy's a part of the front office before as well under Ernie, like that is so damning. And I had this conversation with a caller yesterday too, who's like, oh, they got a hit like they did with Kelly and with Otto. And I'm like, Otto was the third overall pick. Like, what are we talking about? Oubre was a good player who never got to a second contract here, and the team still hasn't won 50 games. Like, our definition of what hitting is so low. And that kind of also gets to an expectations game. And you talk about resetting and Ted's upset they didn't make the playoffs the last 2 years. For years, I've heard that like making the playoffs is the goal. And part of that is a financial situation where like you make the playoffs, you get the playoff gate, team's profitable, hooray. If you don't, they're not. And so will Ted be willing to do exactly what you just said and gut everything, even if that means missing the playoffs for a couple years in order to truly contend? Or is the goal here still just to make the playoffs? Because if that's the goal, I just don't see how anything really changes.
That is, talk about playing armchair psychologist. That's definitely the harder thing to kind of game out is Ted Leonsis' mindset in that. So what we know now, if you think about it, is missing the playoffs, obviously not an option, but is Ted Leonsis willing to sell hope? Like, is he willing to kind of do the Memphis of it all before Memphis got good, or even, some like New Orleans, honestly, with a guy like Trey Murphy and Brandon Ingram playing really well, New Orleans is not the best basketball town. I don't think anybody who's ever been to that arena and see how many empty seats they have would say that, but that's a really fun, young, exciting team that basketball people are paying attention to. Like, is Ted Leonsis willing to make that chance? I kind of, from a analyst perspective and not a reporter's perspective, I really hope that's what he does, because Craig, you've been out to local amateur tournaments that happen all throughout the summer in DC. Like, people don't really care in this city about huge names as much as they care about guys who play hard and who are young and exciting. Like, people went nuts for Jordan Goodwin. And I'm not saying you need a team full of Jordan Goodwins, but if you're selling hope instead of or making the playoffs, I think that could be a successful thing in this market. I think that could really work for Ted Leonsis. But of course, you got the roster to do that.
Right. But I think selling hope is so much better. Like, that's an easier sell. If I'm Monica Dixon and her staff on the business side, I'd so much rather sell hope than I would, hey, we might be the 6th seed if we get lucky. Like, I can sell hope better than I can Kuzma, Porzingis, and Beal. And those three are all individual excellent basketball players. And I always feel bad kind of like poo-pooing that trio because they're all individually excellent players, but they're not like superstars. And you need one of those to win. And the hope is that you're going to get one. Like, that's the hope that you're selling. And I genuinely hope that after all of these years in the NBA, and now for the first time, like, you don't have a young guy that's like that. You don't have a John Wall or Bradley Beal coming up, Brad crossing over into his 30s. Like, I hope Ted realizes that. And I know Candace wrote a great column for you guys the other day that they kind of expressed the hope of that. I won't be convinced until a new executive comes in and says everything is on the table.
Yeah. I do think that's kind of something that I've heard, that a lot of people around the organization do think that everything has to be on the table for this to happen. And I don't think there's any new GM who would come in and say, you're telling me I have to keep these guys. And I mean, no, that's not true. Let me walk that back. There are definitely people who take that job. There are only 30 of them in the NBA for sure.
Right.
But I don't think it would be the smartest thing to do. And I think, honestly, that would just be the best outcome for everybody, and it would kind of make everybody happy.
No, I agree with that too. Hey, Brad, we're not trying to run you out of town. We're trying to do what's best for you. All right.
No, I mean, seriously, like, Brad cares about that stuff, and he cares about dedication to the city, and the neatest way for everybody to do that, and again, this is not reporting, this is just from my brain, the neatest way for everybody to do that is, no one's the bad guy here. We're heading in a new direction. Give us 4 or 5 teams that we could help you find. And I don't think Bradley Beal would be upset with that at all. He's given everything he has to this organization, and it hasn't worked. And that's plain to see.
Yeah, we'll see you in a couple months with a really, really, really warm welcome back video. All right, reporter hat back on for a moment. Who are the names? Okay. Like we know the names that are bandied about out there. Masai, Bob Myers, who you already mentioned, Tim Connolly from Minnesota. What have you been able to learn about who may or may not actually be a viable option, and maybe some names that aren't being mentioned?
Yeah, Tim Connolly is definitely one to take a look at, obviously, who ran Minnesota this year. He's got a lot of ties to DC. He's got a lot of ties to Wes Unseld, who is his really, really good friend of 20 years and started out working with him in the DC area. So we know that Wes is coming back as coach. That's somebody, that's a GM who would definitely be happy to say, oh yeah, I get to work with my guy again, rather than coming in and saying, wait a second, you mean I don't get a hand in helping pick the coach? So I think that's definitely something to consider. And the New Orleans Pelican GM has been kind of out there in the ether a lot. He's really young, really smart. Like I said, I mentioned those guys. He drafted Trey Murphy III, drafted Dyson Daniels. Those are 2 guys I really liked from last year's class. He's young. He's got fresh ideas. He knows what it's like to kind of work in that type of market of a team where it's not the biggest market in the world. It's not the smallest market in the world. It has advantages. He knows how to be a little bit wily. And critically, he's not making $8 million a year like Tim Connolly is. So that's something to consider as well. You know, when we talk about the guys like Masai and Bob Myers, like, those are 2 of the biggest names in the NBA. Is Ted Leonsis going to pay those guys what he would have to pay them to get them to stick around? Is he going to give them the control? I think those are 2 questions to really, really consider. But when you're looking at names, I would say look at kind of a little bit more under the radar GMs, maybe assistant GMs, people who are new, who can bring in fresh ideas and kind of have a mindset they want to prove themselves. And I'm willing to work within, not limitations, but I'm willing to work within an owner who doesn't want to cede total control to me. Like, yeah, I can run the basketball side. I don't need everything else.
Right. If I'm them, I'm looking at organizations like New Orleans, like Oklahoma City. Like, who are the people that are helping influence that beyond like Sam Presti in Oklahoma City?
Memphis, Milwaukee,
totally.
Sacramento. I mean, like, you have a lot of success stories in the past few years to look at that are coming out of mid-market teams. And I know that DC is not a mid-market, but maybe it would behoove the team to have that kind of mindset and say, let's operate a little bit like grittier like that and say, yeah, we're operating a little bit like a mid-market, but we have the advantages of a big city with a lot of things to offer. Like, I don't see the downside to that.
No, I don't either. That would be great. That would make all of us basketball people very, very happy.
We should run this team, Craig. What are we doing?
We would cost so much less than Bob Myers.
We would cost so much less than Bob Myers. That's so true.
Combined. Hey, we'll be co-GMs. You can pay us so much less than Bob Myers. You get 2 for the price of 1.
Just like Succession.
Yeah, sure. Just ever nobody dies.
Mm-hmm, right, yeah.
So that's
ideally, yeah.
That's that ideally. I don't want to work for you. We can't guarantee that, Ava. Come on. Seems like a bare minimum.
No guarantees. It's all on the table. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I'll consider. That might at least cost me a Bob Myers price tag. Who am I kidding? I work in radio. Ava Wallace, everybody. Reader, WashingtonPost.com/sports. Ava, always a pleasure. Thanks for coming on, and I'm sure we'll talk to you in the next couple of weeks as more news develops.
Thanks so much for having me.
This is the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.
Fiberglass window. Free estimates in their Fairfax.
It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Damon Mendelara coming up, joining us here in just a few minutes. He is going to talk about the big story of the day, the gambling story with us. Also, I'm actually really excited to talk to DA about this. he had a podcast, or he had his podcast, as we call it here. Hey, we're podcasting here. But it's actually called New York Accent. But he had Greg Maddux on. And Toby, I don't know about you, but Greg Maddux for me was one of my favorite players growing up. So I grew up in Greenville, South Carolina, where, I grew up in Greenville, South Carolina, where Atlanta was the closest team to me. And I just, when I was 5 years old, the Braves win the World Series. When I'm 6, they make it back. They lose to the Yankees. And that they're in the middle of that 14-year run where they win the NL East every single year. And they were definitely my favorite team. I've not had a favorite baseball team in a long time, and I definitely had a little bit of bouncing around baseball team as a kid. I mean, now that I'm here, obviously I'm a Nats fan. But I mean, Toby, I'm so old the Nationals didn't exist back then. But Maddux was a guy that was so much fun to watch because he was so different. And I'm trying to think of who are the guys in sports that kind of are that same thing right now. In a way, Steph was that. I mean, Steph's better at basketball than Maddux was at baseball, which is saying something because Greg Maddux is a Hall of Famer and one of the 50 greatest pitchers, if not 25 greatest pitchers to ever pitch. But to me, guys that do it and dominate in a way that's just so different in an age where power was king, especially in the late 90s and the steroid era, for a guy that was just I'm going to, this backdoor fastball is coming. And for the kids listening that are too young, you old souls listening to radio or perhaps watching the stream or listening to the stream on the Odyssey app. Maddux had this two-seam fastball that to lefties looked like it was going to hit him in the hip and always caught the inside corner. And it was 88 miles an hour. It wasn't like it was a 98 mile per hour two-seamer. And you knew that it was going to cut back, but your instincts couldn't do anything but make you jump out of the way. And he backdoored it on righties, but against lefties, 2 strikes, you knew it was coming. And he struck so many dudes out looking with it. It was nuts. And I don't know who the equivalent is to that now. I don't watch enough baseball, if I'm being honest, to know who the baseball equivalent is. But even in other sports, guys who do it in unorthodox ways are some of my favorite players.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, the obvious one that stands out, a guy that does something that no one's ever done, is Shohei Ohtani, being able to do what he did. But I don't know that he goes in that same mold as a Maddux, where everybody zigs and he zags.
Right, he just zigs better than everybody, both on the mound and in the box.
Yeah, exactly. Clayton Kershaw's had to evolve as a pitcher, but I don't think he's on a Maddux level in terms of how much he's had to evolve.
Right, because he still threw mid to upper 90s. He just had that nasty 12-6 curveball that was that's closer because he has a distinct pitch that's his and is different, but it's not. He still has the fastball.
I'm speaking more so right now. He's throwing in the low 90s, but maybe a guy would be like a Jokic.
That's who I was thinking too.
He just plays so different than anyone has ever played the center position, and he does it his own way, and he's so dominant in the way he does it.
Well, and he doesn't do it with overwhelming athleticism. And that's the thing that made Maddux so special was, I mean, it's skill and it's precise skill and but everyone's it's a guile, it's this. It's no, it's extreme skill without some of the physical dominance that other athletes give you. And I think that's the thing that makes it so special is Jokic isn't running faster, jumping higher. He's strong as an ox. But for him, it's in a way the same thing that Maddux did, where he just understands angles and sees things others don't. He has an imagination that allows him to play the game in a way that others don't. And Steph has some of that. Steph is the grandest version of this that's ever existed. But Jokic was the other guy I was thinking of. I don't even know what you do with the NFL. I guess it's is there, Jarvis Landry? I mean, he's not nearly as good at football as Maddux was, but Jarvis Landry ran a 4.7 at the combine and he's been getting open for a decade. It's guys like that there's just such an appreciation because it doesn't really make sense, but it works.
Yeah, I mean, guys like Cole Beasley, maybe an Edelman, an Amendola, but even then, I don't know that really compares to a Maddux because they have it almost easier because they're coming out of the slot.
Sure, but also those guys, especially Edelman and Amendola, I think more so than Beasley, but even Beasley, like they had, like if you did their 3-cone shuttle times, I don't think they would be slow, right? Like they have that suddenness and burst that's different. I mean, Hunter Renfrow certainly is not didn't blow his raw athletic score at the combine wasn't super high, and he just understands angles in a way that's
one for
crazy.
You. Is that would this? I don't know if I think of him as a crazy athlete. Travis Kelce.
I mean, Kelsey's pretty freaky athletically. I mean, he
is, but it's not like he's like sprinting away from dudes.
Sure,
He
no, he definitely has that understanding of like space that's different. Like he's got a spatial awareness thing that's probably his most special trait. But I still think he's got enough athleticism that I won't necessarily say like he's not throwing 88 when everyone else is throwing 98, you know? And I think that was cool. So we'll talk to DA about his discussion with Maddox on his podcast, but more importantly, we'll talk with DA next about his thoughts on the story of the day in the NFL. Gambling suspensions for 5 players, including the Commanders' Shaka Toney. Damon Amendola joins us next on the Hoffman Show.
You can take the Team 980 with you anytime, anywhere with you.
It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Each and every Friday, or I guess not each and every Friday, each and every week, he kind of bounces around, which is fine. It's why you just listen all the time, and as long as you listen all the time, then you'll find Damon Amendola when he's on. How about that for a tease, DA? Ever been introduced by like that before? That's what I'm saying. All right, so just never miss a moment. By the way, how's Mraz doing after the colonoscopy last week? I can't believe that's where we're starting, but that's where we're starting.
Well, I think he's doing okay. My last check, he was still alive, which is good. He got a clean bill of health, which is good. The concern was that after he fully cleansed, my producer decided that instead of taking doctor's orders, that was for lunch. At night, he had 2 Taco Supreme Crunch Wraps or something. So, as you might imagine, the next day was pretty explosive.
Oh, I don't know you had to use that word. Really? People are just trying to get home safely. Damon.
Combustible?
I'm moving on. I'm moving on so fast.
Please.
All right.
Please.
Well, I'm glad he's fine now. Big story of the day, of course. You got 5 NFL players suspended for gambling. 3 of them indefinitely. 2 for 6 games. I get the indefinite ones. You can't gamble in NFL games if you're an NFL player. But Damon, I started the show by saying I think it's pretty absurd that NFL players are getting suspended in 2023 when you can gamble on your phone basically anywhere because they gambled in a team facility, especially when the team facility could include their hotel room on the road the night before a game. Where do you land on this and whether or not the NFL is doing the right thing and being extra cautious or is out of touch with the reality of where they exist?
So I can understand the frustration of suggesting that the team hotel when they're on the road is a, quote, facility, team facility. That does seem to be stretching the definition. At the same time, I'm more disappointed in the NFL because this is so ludicrous that they're trying to have it both ways. They'll take all of the money from all of the gambling entities and then continually, suspend, punish, penalize, what have you, players for living in the world that they just keep encouraging people to live in. Now, I am one that uses online gambling apps. It's legal in New York, and I enjoy, from time to time, laying some shekels on games. But I'm also realistic in this kind of like naivete, I believe, that the NFL wants everybody to believe you should gamble. Everyone should gamble. It's safe to gamble. Keep gambling. Gamble some more. Gamble on this platform. Gamble this. And then say to players, and you don't live in the real world, and how dare you even think about it. I just think it feels so hypocritical for the NFL to do this and we're supposed to think that these players don't ever indulge in that. I don't know. It seems like an alternate reality that the NFL is trying to sell, although I understand why they come down so hard on it because, it's the livelihood of all of these leagues to keep up the idea that everything is on the up and up.
Right, and that's my thing is like, if you're fine with it and them gambling on a college game, right? Like let's say Jameson, and this is the example I threw out earlier in the show, right? Jameson Williams is sitting on the road in his hotel room the night before he plays insert whatever team here, and he throws down a bet through one of the gambling apps, one of the ones that has commercials all day long on Sunday on his alma mater, Alabama. And that gets him suspended 6 games? Like, that just feels preposterous. Where if he had walked outside, he had done it at a restaurant, instead, it's not 6 games. And that, to me, there's just no through line there. Like, I feel like I'm missing something. Why is the team site, whether it's the actual practice facility or any of these other auxiliary team, workplaces, if you will, like, what am I missing that there's any difference there if you're going to allow them to gamble at all?
Well, my guess is, and I don't know this, my guess is exactly what we were just talking about, is that they understand that these players live in our world, and they just keep promoting how great gambling is now that it's legalized. So they have to allow some certain version of these players to gamble, but they can't let it get too close to the game itself, the stadiums itself, the locker room itself. But I mean, how realistic is that? I mean, I don't know. The Calvin Ridley thing is an interesting example. Do we all believe that every player in the NFL has absolutely no stake whatsoever in any game in the league played? That no, forget their own team, their own game that maybe they could affect the outcome, but they're not supposed to even gamble. Calvin Ridley can't gamble on, a Cardinals-Niners game. Do we really believe that happens, that these guys don't have friends bet for them and give them the money? Do we really believe that they don't have a buddy who's on the Seahawks and goes, man, we're going to run all over them today, and suddenly throws money on the over on running yards, through a friend or a family member? I think that the NFL is living in a pie-in-the-sky world, expecting people to believe that that's the truth when I just don't think that's realistic.
Well, if you want to make that argument too, then they shouldn't be able to bet on anything because you think that they don't know NBA guys, like they don't have friends in the NBA. It's certainly like, you're about to have a whole class of rookies that are drafted. A lot of them are underclassmen. Their roommate from the first 3 years who wasn't as good as them but is still in school. They don't have inside information. But that's a liability for the sports books. That's not like the bookies, whether it's, legal or illegal. That's a liability for them on inside information, not the NFL.
Yeah, you're probably right about that. I think it's all quite murky. It's all quite sticky. And I think what the NFL has done is realize there's a fire hose of money. Hey, and our radio stations and radio networks and television stations, et cetera, and online companies have decided the same thing. There's a fire hose of money, and nobody's going to say no to it. And so what you have to do is kind of like manipulate the rules around what you think is tolerable so that you can still get paid. And that's what's happening with the NFL.
Damon Mendelar, CBS Sports Radio, with us here on the Team 980. Also, make sure you check his podcast, New York Accent, or as we call it, what do we call it, Damon?
Hey, we're podcasting over here.
Yeah, correct, exactly. Hey, we're podcasting here. I want to talk to you about the Maddox conversation coming up here in a few minutes, but let's switch gears. NBA last night. Today's has been a show where I'm like, hey, this doesn't make any sense. The inconsistency in the officiating between Embiid, Harden, and if you want to add in Draymond Green, it to me is even worse, Damon, not just because it feels inconsistent within the same game in Philly, but if you add in the Draymond situation, they've got the league on the headset in New York. Like, they can get help. How do we wind up with one guy trying to kick a guy, getting a flagrant one, Draymond, not really trying to avoid a problem, getting suspended, and James Harden accidentally hitting a guy in the nuts and getting thrown out?
So if we separate Draymond for a second here, because the NBA says that this is largely due to his reputation, I don't think that was unfair for Draymond. I find it a little offensive when in modern society people ask for a fresh page every single day, despite having a litany of mistakes or priors or what have you. It's like, that's not really how life works. If there was no accountability for what your previous actions were, then you would never have to make the right decision. And Draymond has had a career of poor decisions in this area, going too far, getting suspended, getting fined, getting teased. And so, yeah, those things should be held against him. You don't walk in a traffic court with your 12 speeding violations of the year and say, well, the state troopers are picking on me. I mean, it's like, you have to – some of that has to factor in. So let's separate Draymond, because I don't think it was so bad. What happened last night in Brooklyn was ridiculous because, first of all, there's no doubt that what Joel Embiid did is far more dangerous than what James Harden did. That the fact that Joel Embiid does not get tossed from that game then felt like they tossed James Harden as a makeup call. But that's not right. You also can't do that because what James Harden did was far from an ejectable offense. And I know a lot of people have said he went below the belt. I keep watching that play. It feels like he's got an elbow almost in his hip or like just above his hip, like his hip bone. I don't really see it going that far down, but neither here nor there. That's not an offense that should get a flagrant 2 and get him kicked out of the game. So if they're doing a makeup call for Joel Embiid, that's absurd. And then it's almost like they're making up for the makeup call when they toss Nick Claxton later on in the game, for basically flexing and mean mugging, which, I mean, I guess it's taunting, but in a playoff.
Yeah, I mean, for Claxton, he just did it for too long. Like, he basically begged the officials to kick him out. If he does it real quick and then moves on, fine. But he like, got in Embiid's face and tried. It felt like he was trying to goad Embiid and get Embiid kicked out, and it backfired. And I have no problem with that.
I just think that last night the barometer was all over the place, and if they would have gotten it right in the first one, where Embiid gets tossed for potentially kicking a guy in the you-know-what, then none of that happens. Or if you're not going to kick Embiid out, then you have to not kick Harden out either, and the whole thing kind of spiraled out of control.
Yeah, Damon Amendola, CBS Sports Radio. Okay, now very important question. We all try to dance around saying dudes got hit in the What is your favorite way to dance around talking about where Royce O'Neal got hit?
I heard undercarriage today.
Ooh, that's a good one. That's a good one.
Yeah, hit the undercarriage. That seemed to evoke not only like a sensitive area, but also do it diplomatically.
Yeah, I actually just got uncomfortable. I feel like I just got hit when you said undercarriage. I just have that like queasy feeling. It's
a very vulnerable place on a male's body.
Yeah, it is.
The undercarriage.
But
it's still professional.
Yeah, my favorite thing is watching everybody dance as opposed to just like saying it with like we all saw the video. We know what happened. You don't have to be like he got hit in the how do I say this? I have to tiptoe around. Like he got hit in the nuts, man. It sucks.
But you really think that it was that low? It looks like he puts his forearm into his hip.
Yeah, I think his hand accidentally did a whack job. Yeah, okay. I think as I agree with you because I've seen Harden make that move a million times. It feels like before where he drives right, his left arm is kind of in the guy's hip to keep the distance, and I think as he went to kind of push into the hip, his hand like got away from him a little bit. It was an accident, which is why I think it's so preposterous that he got ejected. But I think his hand got him in the nether regions.
Have you ever seen a playoff game where a guy got ejected for that play? I mean,
No.
I can't even believe that that's plausible.
I know that Stephen A. was going nuts on First Take this morning, which is typically a sign that I need to keep scrolling. But I actually agree with him on this one. If he's apoplectic, that it's the worst worst ejection in NBA history. I'm sure there's been some dumber ones in the regular season. A guy like is mad at himself and is cussing at himself, and the ref thinks is cussing at him. Like that happens a couple times a year. But for a playoff game, this is about as bad as I've seen.
It seemed like such an innocuous regular play, let alone enough to get you tossed, let alone enough to get you tossed from a playoff game. It wouldn't have made sense in the regular season, let alone something of this importance.
Right. And that's what makes the Embiid thing so egregious is Embiid was trying to do that, and he just missed. And the reason he doesn't get ejected is because he misses. Like, that is so nonsensical. And for the NBA, or for Tony Brothers, the lead official, to come out afterwards and be like, yep, that's what happened. Like, to me, that's the kind of thing where you go back in the offseason and you're like, hey, guys, we need to talk about this because intent has to matter more than where the contact is made.
It had to have been that they just missed it on Embiid forget that they missed it. They didn't want to toss out a star in a playoff game, and Embiid's the potential MVP, and they don't want one of their biggest stars, gone for an entire playoff game. And then I guess they just rethought it and reconsidered, and it was like, oh, you know what, we blew that, so now we got to be over anxious to toss somebody else out from the Sixers. But, I mean, forget it. We've gone in circles on this, but it's just the rationale is so stupid.
It is. It's calling it rationale is generous. Damon Amendola, CBS Sports Radio. Speaking of things we haven't seen very often, real quick, one more NBA thing. Can you remember a team that is as wildly inconsistent? I mean, consistently great at home, consistently awful on the road as the Warriors? Because if they could play every game at Chase Center, I think they'd win the NBA title. If they had to play every game on the road, it looks like they're going to get swept out of the first round. Like, I can never remember a team that is, over this kind of sample size, so wildly different home and away.
Yeah, I'd like to look it up to see who has this type of discrepancy between home and road, but what I don't ever remember is a champion being this hot and cold, home and road, because usually if you're good enough to win an NBA championship, almost always, you're good enough to win important road games, you're good enough to win on the road, and you're certainly not leaving your home arena and then immediately falling on your face like the Warriors have done all season long. And I think it just kind of suggests an exhaustion. I think this Warriors run, and a lot of dynasties go through this. By the time you get to the end, and we saw this with The Last Dance, the guys are kind of running on fumes. And I feel like that's what this is right now, where the Warriors have kind of duct-taped it together. Steph is still really great, but Clay is clearly not what he once was. They're still trying to fit in other players. And when you're at home and you have the home bounce, and you have that crowd, and you have the energy, you know, you can rise to the occasion to a certain degree, but when you don't, you're just flat and you're exhausted from all these long playoff runs. And remember how much of a struggle the 2 to 3 years were between the Kawhi NBA Finals and last year's NBA Finals. Those were kind of like purgatory years for a Warriors team that was completely banged up, completely wasted on injuries. And so that's my sense, is that they don't have fuel beyond what they have when they get at home, because they've gone through too many rigors and battles over the last 10 years.
Yeah, I just think they also don't have the vets that they've had in the past. And, like, Poole, who we thought was going to be just step into Steph's spot as much as anybody possibly could, is just not that guy. Like, he can be at home. He's not that guy on the road. Kuminga's inconsistent. Like, and even Kerr, to his credit, always plays a bunch of guys in the regular season and then typically has had the luxury of figuring out who he can trust in the playoffs. I feel like he's still going through that, and he played a lot more guys last night, in part because he had to, because Peyton was sick and Draymond was suspended. So who knows what they do when those two come back in Game 4. That's coming up over the weekend. All right. Last thing for you, DA. You talked to Greg Maddux for your podcast. What was the crux of that conversation? Because you typically talk to New York athletes for that, and Greg Maddux did nothing but torture the Mets for, a decade and a half.
Yeah, but he because of that, he lives in infamy here in New York because, as you said, he tortured the Mets forever. He has the most wins, the most complete games, the lowest batting average against, and the lowest ERA out of any team that he ever faced. So he made a career on the Mets. So that he was kind of like this ultimate New York villain, and the Mets and Braves battled throughout the 90s and 2000s in the division. But then also he had 2 World Series against the Yankees, both of which the Braves were the better regular season team. They were going for the repeat in 96, and they had a 2-0 series lead and were on the verge of a 3-1 series lead that then completely unraveled. In 1999, they won 103 games and got swept by a 98-win Yankee team. So there's a lot of New York for Greg Maddux, but I also just really love the chance to talk to a guy that was such a unicorn. We use that phrase a little bit too often, but he really was, because when you think about it, his greatest years were basically the height of the steroid era or right before. He won 4 consecutive Cy Youngs in the mid-90s, and he's got an ERA in 94 of 1.56 and an ERA in 95 of 1.63. Now think about having a sub-2 ERA in a league, the National League, that would soon see McGuire, Sosa, and Bonds absolutely obliterate home run records, and offense grew through the roof because everyone's doing PEDs. And yet here he was without any overpowering stuff, no great fastball, only location, angles, and rhythm. And he's just perplexing these monster steroid guys. I find his career to be so unique in that way. Randy Johnson was great, but he was overpowering. Pedro Martinez was great, but he had this amazing velocity. Maddux was just kind of like a guy that was studying angles with a protractor and yet bamboozled everybody. So I wanted to pick his brain on that. And so I asked him a bunch of questions about, playing the way that he did in the middle of the steroid era, which was all about power and slugging, and him doing the exact opposite. So the conversation was really cool, and I don't think if you're a New Yorker, if you're not in New York, you wouldn't be interested in this. I think if you're just a baseball fan or you remember that era of sports, it's a pretty cool conversation.
Yeah, New York accent. Check it out anywhere you get your podcast. we, in the segment before you popped on, Toby, my producer today, and I were kicking around the idea of like who's the Maddox of today, not necessarily just in Major League Baseball. The best guy we could come up with was Jokic, where he's not about athleticism. He is about supreme skill. Now, Jokic is also 7 feet tall and strong as an ox, but he just has like a skill and an understanding of angles and sees things that other guys don't. Have you given that any thought? Like, who is the Greg Maddux of sports, any sport currently?
I haven't given that thought. That's a really great question. Jokic is a good one because you're right. It's not a sheer athleticism. It's not an above the rim, and he's not Giannis in terms of stature and power. But boy, that's a great question. You're trying to figure out these sports that are played at a certain level today. What's a guy that completely undercuts that by the way that he plays, but he's thoroughly dominant? Jokic is a good one, but I'll have to kick that around. I'm trying to think of like quarterbacks in the NFL that don't have a big arm that just always do precision passing. And Brady kind of comes to mind, but that's not necessarily a fair comp because Brady obviously is a really great passer. So that's a really good question. It once again shows how ridiculous Maddox's career was.
Right. Free topic for you on the show next week. I'll take a simple hat tip.
That. There you go. Producing the show. We need that after Mraz's colonoscopy.
And it comes full circle again. Damon Amendolara, CBS.
I just want to reiterate this. You went to Syracuse, as did I.
Mm-hmm.
I was up there for an alumni event this past week. I left my house around New York, in New York State, but about 3 hours south, and it was 65 and sunny. I got up to Syracuse, and it was 47 and sleeting.
No.
I left Syracuse, and it was frigidly cold. It felt like Arctic blast. I got home, and it was 68 and sunny. And again, I only live a 3-hour drive away. It's a different climate. I'm now convinced more than ever before, even 20 years after graduating, it's actually it might be a different country for all I know.
Wow, that's awful. My favorite thing about Syracuse and the weather is that it snows on graduation about once every 7 or 8 years, and graduation is every year on Mother's Day.
That's exactly right. Before I got to campus, the year before I got there in the fall of '97. They had mentioned that the previous May for graduation it had snowed, and I was like, "What date was that?" They said May 15th. I said, "What the hell is going on?" I couldn't believe it, but then it reminded me this week. My God, I don't live that far away, and it's a 30-degree drop with precipitation.
Incredible. The year before me, I think, got snow, class of 2011. It was really hot for ours, which meant everyone who was hungover like hell from the night before was dying in the Carrier Dome. Dying because there's no, even though it was named after an air conditioning company, for 40 years, it did not have air conditioning in the dome.
That's right. It makes you wonder really how Boeheim survived so long up there.
Yeah, well, he's dead inside, so there's probably that. I'm going to get no wonder I'm never invited back to do these alumni events that you just did. Anyway, thanks for rooting my relationship with the university, Damon.
No problem.
All right, talk to you next week.
Can't wait to do it next week.
See ya. Bye. Damon Amendolara, everybody. Howard Beck joins the show next. The Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app and streaming live on YouTube, youtube.com/@theteam980. Joining us now, great friend of the show, Howard Beck, longtime NBA writer, currently contributing to the Locked On Sports Network and writing for GQ through the NBA playoffs. What up, Beck?
What's happening, Craig? How are you?
I'm doing great, man. So it's obviously been a very, very busy NBA week here. I'm going to save the Wizards stuff, though, for a second, because with all of that's happening there, I haven't had a chance to talk as much about some of the actual playoff games, the actual playoff series. And unfortunately, the through line, the biggest storyline I would say during these playoffs is the officiating so far. And I guess officiating combined with the league office decisions, the suspension of Draymond Green, not throwing Joel Embiid out last night, ultimately throwing James Harden out. And it just feels very inconsistent. What have you made of kind of those three series of calls and how they all relate to each other?
It's interesting because every situation is its own thing. Every series is its own thing. Every controversial play is its own thing. But you do want some consistency as a fan, and not just the fans. Of course, the teams want consistency because they want to know what they can expect, what the consequences are or aren't for various infractions. And so when you see Draymond Green ejected for a flagrant 2 for the stomp on Sabonis, which was the right thing, right? Like nobody disputes. I don't think even the Warriors would dispute that ejecting him flagrant 2 was the right call.
I honestly don't agree. I just thought that was like a gravity and, imbalance situation. But like if they had just ejected him, I would have been like, I hate that, but fine, move on. But I hear you.
The suspension was the part that people were more surprised about and is more controversial. But the in-game assessment of a flagrant 2 and ejection seemed reasonable, I think, to most people. But then I'm at the game last night with the Nets and Sixers, and within the first, several minutes of the game, you have that situation where Nick Claxton steps over a prone Joel Embiid, who, not liking the step over, kicks up at his groin area. His foot doesn't actually land where it would have done more damage, more pain, but he got him high on the thigh. And they review the play, they give him a flagrant 1, allow Embiid to stay in the game. Everybody in the arena was surprised. I'm obviously not just the Nets fans, but I'm sitting in the media section, and we were all thinking, wow, like the Embiid could be gone. And the explanation afterward through the pool reporter who spoke to the crew chief, Tony Brothers, the explanation was basically it was about where his foot landed. And because his foot didn't actually land in the most vulnerable position of Nick Claxton, it was only a flagrant 1. Had it landed in the vulnerable position, to use a wonderful euphemism, he would have been. It would have been a flagrant 2, and he would have been ejected. But you can't kick another player, and you can't kick with the aim toward that region without it looking like that was what your intent was. So that was curious. And then, of course, in the course of that game, we have a couple more of these. Now, James Harden ends up swinging his fist down to somebody else's vulnerable region and gets tossed immediately. And that one, Harden said it was incidental. It's always hard to read intent in these things, but that's part of the situation. He gets ejected, and then Claxton late in the game, flexes on Embiid, gets a second tech, and he's thrown. I mean, it's just last night's game in particular just felt all over the map. And the inconsistency from the Draymond Green flagrant 2 ejection to the Embiid only flagrant 1, those are the things that frustrate people, frustrates fans, frustrates teams. Obviously, the Sixers were more than happy to get the reprieve, but it's not a great look for the league. The more we're all talking about officiating, as we've just done for the first 5 minutes of this interview, the worse it is. The worse it is for the league, because if everyone's talking about officiating, it means that things have probably gone awry. And I will just say, as a general matter, I think NBA referees do an incredible job most of the time. And most of the controversies, or a lot of the controversies, and certainly all the conspiracy theories, are overwrought and sometimes ridiculous. But there are times when the officiating is a real issue. And right now, this week, certainly feels like it's an issue.
I agree, and I don't want to spend too much more time on it. Like you said, we've already spent a lot. But my one thing that I want to say and kind of get your quick reaction to is I think intent has to matter more. Like Draymond's was, even if there was intent, it was a reaction. His ankle got grabbed, and he said it was the second time in the series. But he's kind of in a vulnerable position and reacts. Embiid is clearly trying to do damage. Harden makes that move. I think he makes that move 10, 15, 20 times a game, and often that hand lands on the other player's hip, and you could probably call an offensive foul on it, but it's at the end of the day him trying to make a basketball move and he misses, and there's no intent there. And I think that's where I get frustrated personally. I won't speak for anyone else, but it's the lack of looking at the intent where I don't want guys scared to play basketball, and I also don't want guys trying to do stuff and then not connecting in the right place and then getting away with it. And to me, I think that's why, specifically to the Embiid Harden stuff last night, why they got those calls so backwards.
Yeah, exactly. You know, every driving player is going to use their offhand to try to create some separation or keep a guy, you know, you give him the forearm just to try to hold him off of you. And, you know, it's always a fine line as to whether or not that can be an offensive foul. But a lot of the time you're just driving by a guy and you're just trying to keep him just slightly off you, creating a little space, giving yourself room to drive. And yeah, like, obviously you got to be careful about where your fist is landing. But, you know, I think Harden seemed like legitimately shocked that was the call. And listen, even if they decide it's more than an offensive foul, even if they decided, you know what, you actually hit him as opposed to just held him off, flagrant one would have been fine.
Agreed. Agreed.
And so then we get into this thing where now fans and the teams are starting to think like, is this a makeup call? You didn't eject Embiid, so you ejected Harden, and then now they're mad because you ejected Harden, and now you're giving a second tech to Nick Claxton on what they could have just swallowed the whistle on that one. It really wasn't that big of a taunt. This is kind of stuff that happens every game. So it just felt like the whole night was just a series of inconsistencies.
Yeah, no, I agree. All right, that's enough officiating talk, and probably that's the last time I'm going to talk about that series on the radio, because now it's 3-0, and Phillies certainly looks to be on their way. Howard Beck is with us, contributing to GQ throughout the rest of the playoffs, so make sure you read his work there. The great showing by the Warriors last night. They continue to be way different at home than they are on the road without Draymond. But I actually want to talk real quickly about the other game before we get some of the Wizards talk in at the end here, Howard. And I can't believe how close the Clippers kept that game without PG, without Kawhi. What have you made of that series as Phoenix, who a lot of people thought like, okay, especially without Paul George, they're gonna run away with it? And even though they're up 2-1, these have been close games. And last night was a one-possession game in the final 2 minutes. What have you made of Phoenix so far and kind of their status as favorites to come out of the West despite their seeding?
Missed last night's game, but in general, that series, it's just such a strange one, right? These are two teams that if they're at full strength, and if this has been the teams as they're presently constituted for the entire season, this might have been the 1 and 2 in the Western Conference, right? Like,
right.
Everybody thinks the Suns are kind of the de facto favorites because no one really believes in the Nuggets. Apologies to the Nuggets. And the Clippers, if they'd had a full season of Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, and they've got a really nice supporting cast and a lot of depth, they play tough, they play defense. Like, that could have been like, this is a potential Western Conference Finals matchup and not a 4-5 in the first round. But we don't have Paul George in this series, and the Clippers don't have Kawhi Leonard on top of it for that game, and it's been strange. And the Suns are not a cohesive unit yet. Their bench is really wonky. They don't have any real reliable depth. Monty Williams is still experimenting with his rotation and trying to figure out who he can rely on. And as great as Kevin Durant and Devin Booker are, this is a brand new team. Durant played 8 games with them in the regular season. And so everything feels like it's just hard to define or get a grasp on the matchup, to be honest. And I from the moment the Clippers, won a game in Phoenix and stole home court advantage, I thought this is a series that might go the distance, and it's certainly looking that way. But we don't really know what Kawhi Leonard's health is going forward.
Yeah, and that's obviously the biggest factor. As you saw how spectacular he was, helping them win Game 1 on the road. All right, back to the home team. Howard Beck is with us, contributing to GQ and the Locked On network of NBA podcasts throughout the postseason. A longtime NBA writer. I presume you've been aware of Tommy Shepard for a long time. First the Ernie Grunfeld years, where he works his way up to assistant GM, and then ultimately he's running the ship for the last 4 years. Did you have any inkling that this was coming? We talked throughout the year, Howard. It's not like this team was good, but Ted Leonsis' history says that he's loyal to people through the end of their contracts, and also it seemed like Tommy Shepard was just executing what Leonsis wanted. How surprised were you that Shepard got fired?
Yeah, I was surprised. And yeah, listen, like a lot of people who've been covering the NBA for a while, I've known Tommy since he was the PR director for the Denver Nuggets long ago. So he's, that's a really interesting position, right? So every team operates a little differently. The way the Wizards have operated under Ted Leonsis' ownership is, whether it was Ernie Grunfeld, whether it was Tommy, who worked under, obviously, Ernie before succeeding him, there's always been an understanding that Leonsis had certain tendencies as an owner, as owners do. One of which was not going to ever rebuild, not going to do a teardown, doesn't want to risk an empty building. That market tends to be a little soft with the Wizards as it is. And the other piece is that, a player like John Wall or Bradley Beal, they're going to ride with them until they can't. And, they keep rewarding Beal with max extensions and now a no trade clause. People can put that on Tommy Shepard in the front office. That's reasonable. But the ultimate, decision maker here is Leonsis, who all indications that we've all heard over the years are he does not want to part with Bradley Beal. All the different junctures at which you and I even have talked about, should they have traded Beal or should they do it now? And we did this probably a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. It's
every year, Howard, since I moved to DC in 2015. It feels like we've had this conversation at some point during a season.
And it will hang over them until the day that he either retires or finally does get traded. But it's becoming harder because, the combination of age, injury history, the contract, everything. I was surprised that they fired Tommy when they did. They could have done that weeks ago. That's, they've been out, it hasn't been that long, but still, normally if it's going to happen, it happens quickly, or you get wind that it's going to happen and that it's kind of inevitable. And I think the sense around the league was that they were going to stick with him because, as you know, Leonsis tends to be loyal, not only to players, but front offices. And listen, the track record is what it is. They have not drafted particularly well. They've gotten, good, okay players, rotation guys, but nobody that was going to change their trajectory. I thought they did really well to, first offload Wall for Westbrook and then flip Westbrook for the package from the Lakers that they got. I mean, there's been some decent moves along the way, but you can't exactly say that the track record has been spectacular. And, that's how it goes in this league. If you're, you get so many shots at getting a roster in shape and making the playoffs, and eventually your time runs out. Yeah.
The market for Beal, it obviously would have been really, really strong a couple of years ago. But as you mentioned, age, injury history, contract. What do you think it would be right now if they go, whoever the new executive is comes in and they have that conversation with Ted and ultimately go to Bradley and say, look, man, we need to tear it down. We're starting over. You have the no trade. We want to send you somewhere where you want to be because, we have to, because otherwise you can just say no. What kind of market do you think Bradley Beal will have? And, I would assume that anywhere that that would want him, he'd probably want to go because it's going to be more of a contender who's looking to add that final piece. But what do you think that market is?
Not great. I don't know. I've engaged that recently, asked anybody, hey, first of all, the first question is he even a net plus asset if you're trading him, or are you having to attach other things because teams are having to take on his contract? I mean, I understand, Bradley Beal has been an all-star 3 times in this league. He's a guy who's going to get you, 20 to maybe 30 points a game. You know, he's hit that 30 mark a couple of times in his career. Great shooter. You know, obviously evolved as a ball handler and playmaker over the course of his career. He's a really good player. Like, he's the guy who years ago, you and I probably talked about it, I always wanted to see them trade him to Philly to pair him with Embiid, long before, obviously, they got Harden. And there was a time when I would say that that's still, the allure of that is still strong. But you look at the contract, which is, you know, a max deal. You look at his injury history. He's not that old. Like, he's only 29, but like 50 games this year, 40 games the prior year, 60 games the year before that, which was, you know, a 72 game season. But still, like, he did play 82 in back-to-back years once upon a time in 2018 and 19, but it's been a while, and he's just hurt so often. The contract is huge. I don't know if you're actually trading him for value at this stage. I don't know what you're getting for him. I just think it's a really tough one to do.
It feels that way, and yet every summer there's these trades where you go, wait, you got stuff for him? So maybe for once the Wizards can be on the receiving end of one of those. That certainly would have been the case, or I guess not that specific one, but they would have gotten a lot for Kyle Kuzma at the trade deadline potentially. They now stare down either re-signing him to who knows what of a team or letting him potentially walk for nothing, or I guess they could get lucky and he wants to go somewhere that doesn't have space and they have to sign and trade. If you're the new executive coming into Washington, what do you do with Kuzma? Do you let him walk for nothing and just say it's a sunk cost, or do you try to re-sign him?
I don't let him walk for nothing. I try to, you know, this is going to sound like the obvious thing. The first thing is you try to sign him to whatever a reasonable contract feels like, because even if you don't think he's a long-term piece and you're trying to ultimately move toward a teardown, you don't want to lose a really good player for nothing, an asset for nothing.
Sure.
Sign him to a deal that you can later trade him on, as long as it's not too bloated that might scare teams off. Short of that, yeah, look, I mean, there are plenty of teams that would love to have Kyle Kuzma. Most teams are going to be over the salary cap this summer. The teams that have cap room are in various states of rebuild. Does Kuzma want to go to Detroit? I mean, you know, maybe. Orlando. A couple other teams with cap room. I mean, how far is somebody going to be willing to go? Or is there a team out there that is over the cap, that is closer to contention, that, you know, could make a deal to acquire him in a sign and trade? I think you do everything possible not to let him walk for nothing. But I don't know how big of a threat that is, given that there aren't that many teams with cap room and they may not be places he wants to go.
Yeah, that's true. Detroit's interesting because he's from Michigan. Other than that, I don't have a whole lot for you on anywhere of the other places that you said. The Magic also seem to be good, potentially with young players. So that must be nice. Win 35 games and actually be on the upward trajectory. What's that like? Perhaps the Wizards will know soon. Howard Beck, you're probably going to not find a lot of Wizards coverage in GQ this time of year, but you will find great coverage of the NBA playoffs there from Howard, all playoffs long, also contributing to the Locked On Podcast Network. Howard, always great to chat, man. Appreciate it as always, and probably talk again before the playoffs are done.
Always a pleasure, Craig. Thank you.
This is the Hoffman Show on the Team 980.
Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always alive as well on the free Odyssey app. Hope you're having a great Friday. Got half hour left in the show. We got real things coming up here in just a few minutes. We got some good ones. LeBron James has responded to Dylan Brooks. That is coming up in Real Things, Real People Said into Real Microphones. But actually, Toby, who's done a great job the last couple of days filling in for Anthony, found this when he was searching for things for Real Things. And it's a fun way to look at the NFL draft, which is less than a week away here on the Team 980. Again, we will have live coverage. We will have it following our show Thursday and Friday, as well as coverage on Saturday. Scott Jackson anchoring our coverage Thursday and Friday. He'll be joined by Linnell on Friday and Denton Day on Thursday. So Denton gets the first round, Linnell rounds 2 and 3, and then Pete Medhurst will be on Saturday here on the Team 980 during the rounds 4 through 7. And draft shows are super fun. If I wasn't doing 4 to 7, like if I could switch with Kevin for the day and come back and do the draft, I would probably do it. Too late, CK. You can't switch me now. Okay, I'll be fine. I'll be happy to be done at 7 and watch the first round. But it is, it's an inexact science, and sometimes you make a decision that feels right at the time. And I'm sure the Arizona Cardinals, I don't even know if they have regrets about taking Kyler Murray 1 overall. But it almost didn't happen because another player in that draft literally grabbed Steve Keim, the GM at the time, around the neck and said, that would be a mistake. Here's Steve Keim today on Colin Cowherd's show talking about who that player was and what happened.
Colin, I have a funny story for you. When Cliff Kingsbury and I got together, to go to see players and have dinners, we went to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and had dinner with Nick Bosa prior to the draft.
Yeah,
and loved him. Obviously, our highest graded guy on the board. Amazing in every way. The only thing you had to even say was a negative was probably if he got injured in the future, which you couldn't forecast.
Yeah.
So we were leaving the dinner, and we were walking out of Mastro's in Fort Lauderdale. And I'll never forget, he puts his arm around me and Cliff Kingsbury, both of us, in basically a headlock. And he said, I think you guys are probably going to end up taking that little quarterback. And if you do, he looked over at me and said, Steve, I will haunt you for the rest of your career.
I love that.
And Colin, we got into the SUV, Cliff and I did, to go back to the hotel. And I remember we both looked at each other with wide eyes and said, man, I just said to Cliff, I said, God hope he can't catch him. And he really never did, which was a good thing.
Those are the decisions that franchise has to make. Do you take the perfect player who's a defensive end, or do you take that little quarterback? And look, Kyler Murray's been a good player. But it's the kind of thing where you look back, if you're Arizona, do you necessarily have regrets over that? I don't know that they do. But obviously it's not Keim's job anymore, and it's kind of weird that he's talking because there's a lot of rumors swirling about him that are not good. So weird that he was like, yeah, I'm going to go on the radio. Anyway, we'll put that aside for the moment. But Toby, I'll bring you in on this. To me, if you think about this draft, this upcoming draft, it's kind of the Bijan Robinson question. Bijan Robinson is the surest thing in this draft. He is going to be an awesome NFL running back. I would bet so much money on it. I would bet money I don't have on it. He's going to be fantastic. But he's a running back. So, what do you do with that? And that's the kind of thing that you just, from a positional value, the one thing you don't want to do is bust your draft pick. But you say, who's the guy who's the least not busty? And it's a guy who you traditionally wouldn't take in the first round. It's just, these are the conundrums that teams get themselves into, and I don't necessarily even know if there's a great there's a great answer to this. It's just guy by guy, what's your team situation, what's your team needs, how good is the player, and you have to make those decisions. And a lot of times the mistakes are made on franchise quarterbacks, but also if you don't have one, you're screwed. So I could keep talking myself in circles, but this is the issue. This is the problem, encapsulated in a great story from former Cardinals GM Steve Keim.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm interested to see. Where does Bijan Robinson go? Because you've seen him mocked in the top 10. You've seen him falling into the 20s. I know yesterday you were talking with JLC and said it's probably not going to fall out of the first round, but it's a conundrum because usually you'd think running back, maybe if you're a team that's fully set, right? Think of the Buffalo Bills, think Kansas City taking Clyde Edwards-Helaire a couple years ago, where you're set, there's a running back there that you like, we can improve our offense even more, let's do it. But at the same point, if you think about what Tennessee's done with Derrick Henry, everyone else is going to a really pass-happy offense, and they're just like, yeah, we're going to keep ground and pound. If someone decided that they wanted to take Bijan Robinson and hand him the ball 25 times a game and every single week and see what he can do, or give him 25 touches, whether it's running the ball or getting him involved in the passing game, like, I could see a reason why you would decide to take him in the top half of the first round. Like, say Atlanta's been having him mocked there a lot. If Atlanta decided, hey, we're going to take some of the pressure off of Desmond Ridder, assuming that's who they go with, and we're going to give the ball to Bijan a lot, we'll pass it to him as well, why not take him there? I still am not sold on a running back in the first round, especially that high, but for a guy like Bijan Robinson, who is, like you said, probably the surest thing in the whole draft, and there's a lot of question marks once you get past that, maybe you do take a risk with a running back and just decide, you know what, we're maybe not going to get the most value that we'd like, but we're going to get the best player.
Right. And this is like the crux of it, and this is, now I feel like I'm veering into like the Wizards territory, right? Of like, what actually wins games? And that's something that I don't think enough people, like, as silly as that is, because it's the whole point, I don't think that teams think about, like, what is actually going to win us games enough, or they didn't. And now I think the positional value stuff in the NFL is proof that teams think about it more. Like, they just realize that a running back is only worth so many wins.
Well, and it's tough, too, because what happens if you go ahead and draft the running back who's generational, but your offensive line isn't up to snuff, like you've seen with the Giants the last couple of years with Saquon, or at least a couple of years ago with Saquon, where he's a special running back. We were saying all the same things we were saying about Bijan, about Saquon when he's coming out of that draft, and we didn't really question the Giants when they took him as high as they did. And yet, at times, there'd be no offensive line, and Saquon would get the ball 20, 25 times, but he'd finish with under 100 yards because he just never had the holes to run through. I mean, football is such a team game that if you have the stud running back, but you don't have the offensive line ready to go, he's going to struggle. So, it's so tough with positional value because, what happens if you decide we're going to pass on Bijan Robinson and he turns out to be the stud that we all expect him to be, and you take a tackle who busts?
Well, but then that's the thing, though. Your problem is the tackle who busted. Your problem isn't that you didn't take Bijan Robinson. Because if you take Jahmyr Gibbs in the second or someone else in the third, everyone loves Deuce Vaughn out of K-State because he's small and looks like Darren Sproles and went to K-State, and he turns out to be great, then you're fine. You're not going to regret Bijan even if he's running all over you for the Cowboys. Your problem was the guy you took, not the guy that you didn't. And that's the thing with positional value is the whole reason that you don't take a running back early is it's really, really hard to get a running back that truly separates to a level from the other guys you'll take later that's going to win you games. And so even if you're the Commanders and you plan on running the ball a lot and this guy's going to get the ball 20 times a game, and this is where I struggle because, running back specifically, hey, all he's going to do is get the ball. That seems an important guy to have be awesome. But if you can get who genuinely is going to impact the running game more for their team next year, Bijan Robinson or Peter Skoronski? What about over the next 5 years? What about over the next 10 years? The longer you get, the more likely it is that it's the tackle or the O-lineman, not the running back. Plus, O-line is a lot easier of a projection. Logan talked about this on the podcast a couple weeks ago, and I thought it was brilliant. Part of the reason that certain positions are drafted higher is because they're surer things on the evaluation. This is where quarterback is a total anomaly. It's so important of a position that even though it feels like it's a gigantic crapshoot, you take the quarterback high anyway. But the other positions that traditionally go high, for instance, offensive line, are because they're easy evaluations. There's a fairly low bust rate. And even when guys bust, like Eric Fisher was a bust based off draft position for the Chiefs. He was also the starter at right tackle for a decade. But he wasn't the dominant left tackle or, 7-8 years, whatever it was. He wasn't the dominant left tackle, like all-pro future Hall of Famer you'd hope to get it to. But he flipped into right tackle, and he was fine. And that's the kind of thing that I think is really tough about the positional value thing is a lot of times you're talking about good football players, but for tight ends, most great tight ends wind up getting drafted later because they're traits guys who develop in the NFL versus the polished guy who comes out and doesn't really actually wind up getting that much better. So I think that's what's tough about the positional value thing. One thing I do want to mention real quick, I really wish I'd remembered to put this in the rundown for today, but I'm going to talk about it a lot more next week. I want to do a little more reading, a little more research, so maybe I'm actually happy that I didn't put it in the rundown today. And I know Sam Fortier is going to come on and talk about this next week because we were texting about it earlier. Have you read up on any of the S2 cognition stuff yet, Toby?
I haven't read a whole lot on it, but I saw that C.J. Stroud scored pretty poorly.
So the results that get released are based off percentile. And basically the S2 cognition test is a test that tests it's a test that tests. Good explanation, Craig. You're a professional. It measures reaction time. It measures spatial awareness. It measures things like if-then statements, if this, then that, and it does it through visual input. So, a quarterback being able to say, like, oh, this is cover 2, then I should throw the ball here, is a really freaking important skill. It is the best cognitive test I've ever seen. And the early results, early being the last 20 years, but not everyone getting tested. More and more schools are starting to use it, and more players are starting to use it. The results are really promising, where the best quarterbacks, the guys who have turned out to be pretty successful, have really high scores on this. Receivers also have really high scores. Guys who have to read coverage, corners, DBs have had really high scores on this. And the cognitive stuff that they're testing matters a lot. And Stroud's score was awful. He was 18% or the 18th percentile, where Bryce Young is the 98th. I need to do a little more reading, but my hot take off this, and I'm willing to ride with this. I typically keep my hot takes to myself. I wouldn't take Stroud based off it in the first round. I genuinely feel like if the most important skill, it's like taking a sprinter hey, we're going to do a preliminary screening for the Olympic trials, which I realize is what qualifying is. But if you could do a test and it's hey, he ran a 12-second 100. That's what he just did. If you're that slow on the thing that matters the most, being able to read information visually and then make decisions based off of that, that's a gigantic red flag. And I know there's a lot of tape and there's a lot of other factors. I'm not saying C.J. Stroud's a dummy. I'm not saying any of that stuff. But when it comes to the actual very specific skill set of seeing information, processing it, make a decision based off of that, that's the first checkpoint. The next is can you throw with accuracy and velocity and all those kinds of things? But I'm going to talk about this more next week. I want to talk about with Sam Fortier. He's done some research on some of this stuff as well. So that's coming next week. We got a ton of draft stuff next week. Super excited about it. Make sure you listen to the show next week. Otherwise, you're going to miss out on tremendous football talk. When we get back, you are going to miss out on LeBron James responding to Dylan Brooks if you don't stick and stay right here. First, though, a quick look at what's trending.
Here's what's trending on the Team 980.
5 NFL players have been suspended for gambling. One of them is a Commander. Defensive end Shaka Toney, who was probably on the roster bubble anyway, suspended indefinitely for gambling on NFL games last season. Lions wide receiver Jameson Williams and one of his teammates suspended 6 games for betting on college games while at an NFL facility. The NBA has decided no further suspension for anybody involved in any of the shenanigans last night in Brooklyn. Sixers guard James Harden and center Joel Embiid will not face suspensions for their respective flagrant fouls. Harden ejected, Embiid not. We talked about it earlier in the show. That was ridiculous. That's what's trending. I'm Craig Hoffman. Real things, real people said into real microphones next to close out the show on the Team 980. the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Thanks again to Toby for filling in for Anthony these last couple of days. Ant back on Monday in the producer's chair. We're back at 4 o'clock with a week's worth of NFL draft coverage. Couple of programming notes. Take command. Next week we're going to do a mock draft, our last one. That'll come out Thursday morning. And then we also are going to do our Monday/Tuesday pod, which comes out in video first and then ultimately the audio feeds Tuesday morning. We are going to do the most Commanders players in the draft. So pretty pumped about that. See who Logan thinks are the actual best fits for Washington. Not just at 16, but down through the draft. And then, of course, live coverage on the Team 980, as I mentioned in the last segment. Scott Jackson and Denton Day have you covered on Thursday night for the first round. We also have a live digital show through the podcast arm of our company, 2400 Sports, with Brian Baldinger and Jason Lockenfora. I'll be joining them after the 16th pick, so that'll be really fun to do that stream show with them. That'll be on the Odyssey Sports YouTube page. I'd also recommend if you're driving around this weekend and you want some good draft talk and you've been listening to the show all week and you need something fresh that you haven't heard yet, make sure that you check out Take Command. The episode that we did is a crossover with In the Huddle, which is Jason and Baldy's podcast. People loved it, so go check it out. In the Huddle or Take Command feeds. Just find them anywhere you get your podcasts. Okay, that's the housekeeping. Let's end the show. It's time for Real Things.
Real things.
We're not going to be sucked this year.
Real people.
5 and 11, not very good.
Said into real microphones.
You know, the culture is actually damn good.
All right, so Toby, you're a bit at the controls today. Let's say we start with the Sirianni thing, because I remember that we have that one. So Nick Sirianni, head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles, and Howie Roseman are at their press conference. And they're talking about a new wide receiver they brought into the fold. I believe, right? They signed him, Toby?
I believe, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why else they'd be talking about it. I'm just using context clues here. AKA, it's Friday at 6:50, and I'm talking out of my behind. But they brought in a new receiver, Olamide Zaccheaus. Played for the Falcons. He's very fast. Nick's going to need some help on the pronunciation, though.
Excited about Quez. I'm really excited with our new addition.
Pronounce his name.
I can't. All right.
I appreciate the honesty.
You couldn't at least try, though. Like, you also had to have talked with this guy, probably. Like, you couldn't at least ask him how to say his name?
What you say is you call him Z. I'm really happy with Z. We signed from Atlanta. And if Roseman wants to rat you out, then you can fight him later. But you got to give it something. You can't just our new addition.
Well, at least his last name is easy. Zaccheaus. Like, That's not hard. Say that.
No, but I'm sure it's one of those where, like, once you hear it, it's fine. But you look at it and you're like, Zaccheaus? What? Because it's Zacheus, I believe. Olamide Zaccheaus.
I think he's I'd have to double check. I think he's from UVA.
I think you're right, actually. But I'll let you double check that. Is the LeBron one the only other one we have? No, we have one more too, right? Don't we?
We were gonna play Kime, but we already played that, so we got LeBron.
Okay. LeBron. Dylan Brooks said LeBron was old. After LeBron dropped 28 and 12 on him, although the Lakers did lose game 2, which, fine, whatever. They split in Memphis. So Memphis getting real mouthy, which everyone has been annoyed with Memphis for being mouthy for a while now, since they decided to run their mouth against the Warriors last year, and the Warriors said, sit down, kids, you haven't actually done anything yet. Of course, LeBron was then asked about all this at practice today, and he wasn't really psyched about it.
I don't want to talk much more. Tomorrow's will be a great game. I'm not here for I'm ready to play, and that's it. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Cut the media session short. That was it. LeBron had big dad energy in that one. Toby, I'm sure you watched the clip as you recorded the audio.
Mm-hmm.
Big, like, kids, we're going to get in the car. We're going to go to school. I'm tired of your complaining. Like, no, you can't have an extra snack with lunch. You get what you get. You should be grateful for it. And you're going to be nice to your teacher. And if there's any problems, then you're not going to play video games for the rest of your life. All right? Cool. Get in the car. Let's go.
Yeah, I mean, this had a classic LeBron, like, I'm not going to do my talking at the media, at the mic. I'm going to let my play on the court. When I drop 40 on Dylan Brooks, I'm going to let that do the talking.
So here's the big question. Do you think he will actually drop 40 on Dylan Brooks? Because there is a part of me that says LeBron is going to go not necessarily to a dark place. Like, LeBron's gone to a dark place in a great way once in his career. He completely lost his mind. Game 6, Boston, 2012? No, it wasn't 2012. 20 whatever it was. 2011.
Yeah, sometime in that Heat era.
Yeah, it was, they had lost the first year to Dallas. That was 2011, so it was 2012. Game 6, Boston, 2012. They're down 3-2 in the series, and he gets the big dark eyes and is just like, all right, I'm going to go to a dark place, and I'm going to black out, and I'm going to put on one of the greatest performances anyone has ever seen. And he scored, high 40s, had like 15 rebounds. He was incredible. I don't know that is what LeBron is going to do. I think LeBron's just going to go play. And if he starts to get hot and he starts feeling it, then he might drop 50 on Dylan Brooks. But I think LeBron has bigger fish to fry than Dylan Brooks.
Well, he's going to be worried about he's going to be worried about winning the basketball game. If that means him dropping 40, then he'll go drop 40. But if it means him sticking in his regular role, getting 25 with 10 assists and a couple boards, then he'll just do that. He obviously wants to win first, but if he gets cooking a little bit, I think he might keep it going a little extra. Maybe he comes out a little more aggressive than usual.
Sure. Part of me, though, thinks he might come out and try to have 30 assists. It's like, fine, I'm going to drop 40 on you, and I'm still going to bust your butt. Like, that to me would be an ultimate LeBron FU is like, I'm not gonna do the thing that makes you like
I know I can score 40. How about when I give you 20 assists?
Right. Like, scoring 40 doesn't do it. I want to destroy your soul, and I'm going to do it by dominating you in a way that you didn't even know I could. Like, that seems more LeBron. I hope he does it because I can't stand Dylan Brooks. All right, we will see you on Monday. Again, Toby, thanks for filling in. Very much appreciate you, sir. Missed anything? Check out all the on-demand platforms, and we'll see you back live Monday at 4.
Daniel Snyder has agreed to sell